Welcome back, folks, to another episode of Bearded Wholesome and All Things Baltimore. This is season 4, episode 12. I have a very special guest. Tonight's guest is one of the first non athlete interviewees I've ever had in the duration of my show. I interviewed him almost 3 years ago. He is a world traveled author, an honorary resident of Baltimore City. He works for Baltimore Magazine. He is a fantastic writer. He is an author of a very, very, very informative and uh, fantastic book. I'll let him talk about it a little bit on the show. Everybody, welcome Ron Cassie. Ron, how you doing, man?
Oh, good, Matt. Thanks so much for having me on again. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, it's been a while. To kind of give everybody a background, Ron, you were my fifth guest, and you were my first non-sports elemented guest in the field of uh, you know literature, writing, and media. I remember I was just thinking back to the interview how nervous I was, and how my recording equipment wasn't up to snuff at that time, and the recording issues that I had. And I was like, I'm so much more refined this time. I know this is going to be a lot easier of a transition with Ron. So you have been very busy lately, Ron. You've been writing about a lot of great topics with with Baltimore Magazine. You had just recently traveled through Europe, and you're just in the throes of living everyday life in Baltimore and writing about it. So how's that been going?
Great. I mean, Baltimore is a wonderful city, and I'm fortunate to work at Baltimore Magazine. Now going into my 12th year full time, and I freelanced some before, and um, I was really fortunate. I got a couple big stories off my plate. My our cycles are kind of funny. Some of the editors have cover certain months, and I had gotten the year before I'd gotten a big cover story about The Wire off my plate, and as soon as I filed it, I took a vacation to Ireland and rode my bicycle over there and visited some places where my family was from, some of my family. And then this year, kind of same thing. I had a big cover story in June on Fells Point, the gritty history and gentrification of Fells Point. And as soon as that was filed in May, I took off to Italy, kind of a present, a long overdue graduation present for my daughter from college, with COVID and everything, and to visit where the Cassieris are from. That's my real original last name, and then my daughter came back after the trip to southern Italy and Rome, Naples, and everything, and Amalfi Coast. And then I rode my bike across northern Italy from Milan to all the way to Venice and up to Trieste and down to Slovenia and Croatia. So really, really great. So great to be able to take that kind of time off. Really fortunate.
Absolutely. And I'll ask you, this is what I was thinking of how to, ask you some of these questions about your vacation, and without getting personal at all, because that's
Yeah.
not that's never, a situation I want to be in. You immerse yourself into any town or culture that you happen to travel to. You're not originally from Baltimore, but you have completely immersed yourself. You pretty much are from here, even though that you grew up in Pennsylvania. From our first show, I remember you telling me. Um, did any of your travels in Italy remind you of Baltimore at all? There was like a small town feel, a neighborhood feel? Did you get like a correlation when you were riding your bike through these towns and these cities?
I did, and that's really observant that you pick up on that, because I really do a lot of research before I go visit places. Like, I've learned a lot about Baltimore, and I usually have kind of a little purpose, that I'm going, why I'm going to explore. And I think a vacation, is for me, is usually when I'm traveling with somebody else, a friend or my daughter, something like that. But traveling really alone, I feel like, is when I really am immersed and really feels like more of a journey kind of experience. Sometimes even like, a pilgrimage, like in a sense, almost like a religious pilgrimage to see where my family's from, my roots are from, I'm old enough that, and everybody was lived long enough and had children so young. I knew my great grandparents who were Italian. I knew my great grandfather, Tommaso Cassieri, Antonio Tommaso Cassieri, and my great grandmother, who was Sicilian, Lina Randazzo. And in fact, my middle name is Ronald Lee. It's after Lina, my great grandmother. So I was 15, I think, when she passed. So there was that exploration, and so, as you know, Little Italy. I live in Upper Fells Point, not far from Little Italy. I still sometimes go over to St. Leo's Mass and go to festivals and have friends over there. And a lot of Baltimoreans come from Southern Italy. But I would say, I mean, right to your question, getting a long time to get to it.
No problem.
Naples, feels a lot like Baltimore. Naples in Southern Italy is a big, gritty port city, and it kind of has a rough and tumble reputation. For better and worse, I guess it's associated with, mostly worse, with crime, really with organized crime, like the mafia and at the port and stuff like that. And in Italy, it's kind of Naples against the world in Italy, kind of thing, like we have here in Baltimore. And Naples professional soccer team had just won the Italian league, the top league in Italy, and Diego Maradona had starred for the Naples team back in the 80s and led them to championships. And the whole city was covered with banners and posters and streamers. And I got to Naples right after they had won. And it was still in the air. It was still, there's a statue of Maradona there. It's really still all over, actually kind of Southern Italy, was still in the air. So that, again, very much like Baltimore, big sports city, like we would go crazy when the Ravens or Orioles win a championship. And the character of the people, people were really gracious. I was recently up in New York, for anniversary of my aunt and uncle, and that kind of New York mentality, a little brusque. Sometimes people greeting you, strangers, and in the stores are a little more brusque. And just coming back to Baltimore, where people just are more gracious and helpful. If you're on a corner and you're looking for directions or something, somebody will help you out in Baltimore, and they may even just ask you if you're staring at your phone, do you know where you're going? Like, it was just that way in Naples too. People kind of very gracious and helpful and no pretension kind of. And, also the greatest pizza you'll have anywhere.
I love pizza. That sounds amazing.
Yeah. We took a pizza making class down there and it was really, really special. So I in fact, with a friend, there's been a little chatter about maybe starting a Naples, Baltimore sister city connection. Baltimore doesn't have one with Italy, and of course we have a big Italian American population here. So
yes, we do.
Yeah,
Southeast Baltimore in particular. Yes.
Yeah.
That I'm glad that you had the ability to kind of decompress from the grind of being a feature reporter, and your stories are immersive. They are highly detailed, and it's not like a quick 2 or 3 minute blurb or a read.
Yeah.
You put a lot of work into it. Was it difficult to turn it off when you were traveling, to not want to pick up the pen and paper, go on your phone and just write about what you were doing? Because I know it's hard to do, to turn off something you love doing when you're in a completely different atmosphere and in a country where there's so much to probably talk and write about.
Well, there certainly is a lot to consider. Like, you do come to things like, this is like an amazing story. You come across things like, and the pizza maker was a fifth generation. They call them pizziolas. Was a fifth generation. Literally, he could have been making pizzas for my great grandfather who immigrated, right? His great grandfather could have been, right? My family literally, the Cassiers literally left Naples for New York, right? But to be honest, like, I do put a lot into the stories. I mean, the February cover story on the Highway to Nowhere and the Fells Point were really enormous lifts. I mean, the research would be, enough to get a good start into a book on these things. And the writing is doesn't come easy for me, to be honest. It's hard. It's hard work, really sitting really hard, long time. And I'm also in graduate school. And so when we first went over, my daughter and I were in Rome, and each night I was finishing up my final paper. So we were doing things all day long. My daughter was decompressing, turning on her phone and Hulu and everything. I was grinding away, but it was really nice actually to put everything away and not write for me. It was really great, and just live and just be like, what's the weather today? Where are we going today? It's Italy, so it's always, where are we eating today? That's the big, is you have those 3 meals a day that you really make them count when you're there. So I love that experience of not writing, of just being in the world and being like, where am I going to go for a run today? I want to ride my bike. Where am I going to do that? Where are we going to seek? Where can we, and just what's the weather? Can we walk? And just kind of getting into the habit of getting up early and at the end of the day, just kind of being exhausted because, you walked, you've been outside and you've eaten and you've taken so much in. So I don't have a problem not writing. I'll put it that
Understand.
way. Yeah.
So we talked a little bit, show about your book, and you just recently were on Twitter, and Baltimore Banner posed a question about people new to Baltimore that are either visiting or going to live here, the type of situation. What would be a good book to, help integrate themselves? And your book came up, and I know that you were very happy that somebody had recommended your book. So here we are a couple years later. Your book has been selling rather well. And how has the reception been? Has there been a demand for a second part of the series, or what's going on on the book writing front?
That's a good question. Yeah, it was really nice that somebody posted that in response. And it's really nice when you hear from somebody, who the stories really resonate with, or they knew somebody in one of the stories. They went to high school with somebody. They went to the high school that's mentioned in the story, and you're surprised after 3 years that people are still finding it and it's still resonating, which is really, really wonderful. I'm working on a project right now that won't really turn into a book, but it's something akin to a book. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
Related to some Baltimore history, and farther out, I have a couple other ideas for books that if I can find the time. I mean, it's difficult with graduate school to kind of carve out the time. I would, if you can drum up interest in a follow-up book, that would be great. I do think there's some the longer form stories that I've done for the magazine. People have said to me that they really should be turned into a book, like like profiles of Baltimore, right? Like Baltimore in Profile. Just put the whole longer story in of people, or could do by some neighborhoods or something like that. I don't have a plan at the moment. I kind of want to do something else first before I come back and revisit that. Although, the publisher said when I did it, we could come back and do an updated version. Either add some new stories, or update some stories, or add some photographs, or create like a second volume maybe. There's a potential for that, but I don't want to kind of do that next. I'd like to do something a little bit different. I think I have something I can finish by. It's kind of a little history book, but it's small, and but I think I can get done by the end of the year. That's my goal.
I can't wait to read it. I really enjoyed your book of short stories. With the feedback that you've constantly received? I know you're very active on Twitter. You interact with your followers and people that have purchased the book. What has been the most popular story that was in your first installment that you keep on getting messages about to this day?
Oh gosh, I don't know if there is one story. I mentioned the there's I think Notre Dame High School is mentioned where Nancy Pelosi and Barbara Mikulski both went, but it's meant there's two stories. One is around a nun, and they're both around nuns, but a number of women who got to Notre Dame mention those stories because there's some longtime sisters who taught there and one who worked with the basketball team of all things.
Are you talking about
And
IND in Baltimore?
yeah, IND, yeah.
My wife is a graduate of there. I think you
Yeah,
might be referring to Hildy.
Hildy, that's it.
Yes, my wife
And
loves Hildy.
Hildy and
She is an absolute legend.
yeah, exactly. And I talked to her a couple of times, met her at a basketball game, and I went to Catholic grammar school and played CYO basketball, and I know a lot of nuns are really big sports fans. I mean, you go to the ballpark and see them.
Yes, they
Camden
are.
Yards are in DC, and it's always been that way. So that one really warms my heart, and people bring that up quite a bit. I
She
would say
passed away a few years ago.
yes, she did. Yeah.
It's been a while, but Sister Hildy holds a very special place in my wife's heart, and that was one of the harder non-familial deaths that that she's gone through, and she had an immense impact on generations of IND alumni, and it's a shame that the school's closed down now, and because we have a little girl and we would love to have sent her there. We were just hoping that it would hang around because it seems like Catholic high schools that are not $50,000 a year that have hedge funds CEOs donating, it seems like they're dying by the wayside.
Yeah, very, obviously close knit community, close knit alumni group that goes back forever, and there's a real bond, and yeah, Sister Hildy. I mean, I think there's a lot of us have people like that in our lives, in our schools or parishes or in our community. Sometimes it's a little league baseball coach who's there all through your growing up years or something, and I had, this is not actually in the book, but there's another story I'll just tell you real quick. I got a phone call the other day in the Fells Point story. The opening spread image in in our June cover story, but when you go inside the magazine, is of May 1940 of Thames Street.
It looks crazy. Like I loved it because it pops up right on my phone right when I was reading it earlier.
Yeah, and it's right. It's like it's out of a Humphrey Bogart movie or something, right? It's really this kind of like 1940s noir, and there's a boat in the front, the Gertrude, which was a pilot boat to bring in bigger boats and also to take things out right to the bigger ships. And a woman called me. I'm literally in Whole Foods. I answer my phone. 91-year-old Polish American woman asked, if I'm Ron Cassie, and she has the right number and everything. And she just said, I was just in the doctor's office and I saw the magazine, and she goes, my husband piloted that boat. He was the skipper. That's what he did on the Gertrude.
Wow.
And she tells me the whole story about the company and names of the other boats they had. And then her sons got into the business after her husband retired, and they worked on the Gertrude. And she told me about, how they, went out to meet the big ships and bring them in or carry things out to them. And during World War II, actually bringing supplies and munitions out to Navy vessels out there. And she was her father was born here, but her grandparents had come like 5 years before her father was born, like 1883. Her father was born like 1888 or something. I mean, she's 91. She sounded terrific. Of course, they lived right around the corner from me in Upper Fells Point. They went to Holy Rosary. She went to Upper Fells Point School number 6. And so it's things like that, when you're a writer, and I get this a lot from the book, is there's a nugget, there's something that really resonates with people. And the crazy thing too, the real fun of being a journalist in Baltimore, in a city where I've lived and worked for a long time, is that photograph came up totally randomly. We were really struggling to find an image to put there. And Tony Norris, who owns Bertha's Muscles and is well into his 80s, I interviewed him. He's in the story. His wife, his son, runs it now. I said, if you've come across any great photographs, because Barbara Mikulski and Mayor Schaefer and John Waters and Divine back in the 70s would be in Bertha's, just send them along. Maybe it's something we can use. I'm just kind of casting about for art to go. And he texts me, I don't know, a week or two later, that photo. He said, I bought this on eBay, many years ago at this point. I just always thought it was a cool photograph. And that photograph becomes a 2-page spread in the magazine. And then the woman calls, and her husband worked on that boat. And so those are wonderful experiences, and they're not uncommon either. As I'll say, as a writer in Baltimore, and with the book, I especially early on, I had a lot of those kind of phone calls or emails and stuff like that.
That's incredible. I wanted to ask you something. You mentioned that you had your big piece on The Wire last year, and you took your vacation to Ireland and all that. The Wire is going to go down in history in lore as one of the greatest television shows of all time. I know I'm biased. I'm from here. Did you get a chance to watch I guess it's not really a sequel, but HBO kind of considered it to be that, We Own This City. Did you ever get a chance to view that and kind of correlate the two?
Yeah, I mean, I see them really as there's like 3 parts. Like, I think The Corner, if you've ever seen that on
Yes.
On HBO, like I think The Corner is my favorite of all of those by far. I think Charles Dutton, the direction, it just is really unlike anything else in terms, I think, of its empathy and curiosity and the real portrait of real lives. And it doesn't use The Wire, right? I mean, like all of these crime kind of shows, there is a sense of kind of glorifying violence and certain aspects, and kind of there's a certain exploitative element to anything Hollywood kind of does like that, right? Anything that's going to really resonate in that level. Even though there's, David Simon has this deeper mission in mind about exposing the uselessness of the drug war and the effect of globalization on cities like Baltimore. Baltimore is not alone, as he says all the time. It could have been St. Louis, it could have been Cleveland, it could have been Detroit. We Own This City, I felt like was needed because I think The Wire misses what the extent of the corruption and brutality of the Baltimore Police Department historically. That this has been, endemic, and the police forces everywhere. And the drug war, I think, really ratcheted up for police opportunities for corruption because there's so much money to be made, in drug dealing. And
that's a fair assessment.
So I think it really was like the last year kind of that to expose that, because I think, the year David Simon, I put this in the story, the year David Simon made The Wire, the last year, I think 15 Baltimore citizens were killed by police. And that number has come down very significantly since 2015. Maybe it's like, a handful now, 5 or 6. And it was significantly, it had been even higher than that in previous years. So, and yet in The Wire, a police officer, I don't think ever fires a gun in all the seasons of The Wire and episodes. So, except the one guy accidentally, right? Like,
yeah, that's really interesting because I've watched the 10 times over at this point. I received it on the complete box Blu-ray set for my first Father's Day gift from my wife and my daughter.
Yeah,
and I've watched it, and it's good. It's a good point. I don't remember guns being fired by the police all that much during the show. If anything, they were doing stakeouts and interviewing undercover informants. And I know we talked a little bit about this on our the first time we you know got on camera together, but The Wire filmed. If you can recall, when Bubbles was living in that garage with the young boy in season 4, and then he got clean in season 5, and he was living in his sister's basement. That was my grandmother's house.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. I don't think.
Yeah, I don't remember if we talked about it on screen or not. I thought we did, but they shot all the scenes there for both seasons in a week, and they had the Hollywood trailers like blocking. My grandma lived on a one way street in Medfield, and it was just like utter chaos. But they fixed up the basement because they turned it from a garage into a livable space, and they were looking for an old fashioned had the floor beams open on the ceiling with no drop ceiling on it, and they were looking for somebody that had like a checkered marble tiled floor with cement walls, and my grandmother had all of that. And
Mm.
they came down, looked at it, and they said this is perfect. So Andre Royo, who is the actor, spent an entire week in my grandmother's house, which was really cool. And I actually got the opportunity to be an extra, and We Own the City. And I was like, it's really it's really odd seeing a bunch of people that aren't from Baltimore try to embody it on camera. They did a pretty good job, but being born and raised, some stuff was just kind of like eyebrow raising. And like you said, Hollywood definitely adds a whole different element to it. So it might seem disingenuous at times, but I overall I enjoyed the experience. But it was just crazy to actually be a part of it, because when The Wire came out, I was like 11, maybe 10. So I wasn't old enough to even watch it at that point.
It's I think it's really an incredible, obviously groundbreaking show. I would consider with the Sopranos or and Mad Men as just and even above Breaking Bad, but in really groundbreaking cultural and cinematic really storytelling is really remarkable. I David Simon gave a tremendous amount of work to a lot of not very well known actors, Baltimore folks, from wardrobe, makeup, grips, the whole thing. That's amazing. I know he's very loyal to those people, and then everybody who works with him is really has great things to say about him. I think it was always the cliche that when you travel, if you do go to Ireland or Italy, the thing people will know about Baltimore is The Wire. But I know you'll appreciate this. When I was in Italy, I met two people who saw like my Orioles hat, knew I was from Baltimore, and they were
Oh,
Ravens fans.
they're starting to expand into Europe. The NFL has games. We're actually going back to London this year. The Ravens are, and
Yeah,
they've expanded into Germany, Ireland, Mexico, and they've previously played in Japan. So the game is starting to be international. But seeing that you were in a completely different continent and
yeah.
people recognized your Orioles hat.
Yeah, I had a
That's
bee
an
on, or
amazing
I
thing.
had the Orioles bird, and a couple people somehow knew it was Baltimore. Are you from Baltimore? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, how'd you know? Like, oh, your hat. I'm like, are you an Orioles fan? They're like, Ravens fan. Like, but they knew the connection. I guess
Right.
the games are televised over there. Uh, One funny aside: a number of years ago, I was in Nicaragua traveling on vacation and went to the Nicaraguan World Series. And
Oh,
it's a big baseball country. That's the number one sport, actually, not soccer there. And again, everybody knew the Orioles because of Dennis Martinez.
okay.
Everybody knew Baltimore, and so I wore my Orioles hat to the game. And I don't really speak Spanish, but baseball is kind of a universal language, so it was
It
easy to
is.
chat and enjoy the game and everything.
Yeah. Before we get into the Orioles, because I know you wrote a piece on the Orioles, and I want to pick your brain about that. It's funny you mentioned The Sopranos talking about The Wire, because my wife and I have both, admittedly, I'm not even afraid to admit this, until recently we had never seen an episode, because we hadn't had HBO, but we got a subscription to Max, and we've been binge watching it for the better part of the last month. We're in the middle of season 4, and the way HBO had a very uh, unique way they shot their shows, and there was a lot of similarities in terms of um, like just setting, lighting, mannerisms amongst the people on screen. And there was a couple of characters that crossed over, not as themselves from the other show, but I remember seeing a couple of characters from The Sopranos and The Wire and vice versa. Michael K. Williams was in one of the shows when Jackie Jr. got killed. He was in that episode. He was staying with him, so it was just funny you mentioned that. But getting to our Orioles, Ron,
Okay.
it's a very exciting time right now to be a Baltimore
Yeah.
Orioles fan. A
Yeah.
lot of people have been waiting for this era of Orioles baseball for a very long time, myself included, because when the Orioles last won their last World Series, it was 6 years before I was born. So I've lived through 2 Ravens Super Bowls. I got to
Yeah.
experience one as a child, and I got to experience one as an adult. And right now, I would sell a kidney to go to a World Series game at Camden Yards if the opportunity presented itself. But you wrote a solid piece on the 40-year anniversary of the last World Series. And
Yeah.
who was your favorite person to talk to while you were gathering information for that story?
Boy, that's really hard because, to be honest with you, I mean, the people that I wanted to talk to really were Scott McGregor, Rick Dempsey, and Ken Singleton. And, um, I know probably people think Cal and Eddie, but they've been interviewed so often, and you can read what they think about everything. I mean, Eddie doesn't give many interviews, and I did
He
do a
doesn't.
side piece with Eddie Murray actually, and got some great responses from him. Um, um, so I did get a chance to have a back and forth with Eddie, which was spectacular, which was great. And I'm going to
I'm jealous.
Bobblehead Night. That's coming up. I don't know when this
I'm
airs.
jealous because Eddie Murray is like a one of my favorite Orioles.
Yeah, I mean, I'm old enough that I went to Memorial Stadium and remember the Eddie chants. So they were all super generous, super insightful, and as I know you're a huge sports fan, and no matter how much ball you played, like I did at high schools, American Legion, all that stuff, college, it doesn't compare to what these guys know and experience and the insights that they have, right? Just is not close. And forget the ability, just what they experience and their insights and everything. And they're all super great. I think Scott McGregor was the I was the best for me to talk to. I think he's remarkable in that he never threw hard, and he was just a kind of quintessential crafty left-hander, and was a competitor. He just he just was a kind of a bulldog out there. He threw strikes, he went after people, he just got guys to hit ground balls, and having him share that experience. So, because this is the thing I think the story kind of hinges on a little bit is Scott McGregor had pitched great in the playoffs in '79 when the Orioles lost to the Pirates. He lost the last game. He allowed like 2 runs in 9 innings, and he took the loss. And he pitched great in the White Sox in the American League run up to the World Series in '83, and took a 2-1 loss. And he was kind of a hard luck pitcher, and I think his father-in-law was going through some health issues in Philadelphia at the exact same time. And so just Scotty McGregor, what was going through his mind, in the clubhouse, going over the hitters before the game kind of thing. And just hearing about all that. And even despite like how big these moments are, I mean, we all get like tense just watching. He's kind of a religious guy. He does he's a person of some faith, and I think that helps keep him on. It does help keep him on an even keel. I mean, he'll say that, and so it was interesting just to hear how he stayed. Didn't get too up or too down. He just moved, I think, to Florida, but he stayed in the Baltimore area forever, and so I think talking to him was he was the person I was really looking forward to talking to. what's it like to go out on the mound on Game 7, and you've had this like kind of hard luck thing, and how much time do you spend going over the hitters, and he didn't spend a lot of time. He's like, by then, you've been to the daily reports before the series. You watched all the other pitchers face all these guys. It's just kind of time to go out there and do it. And he just shut them down. And then last thing I'll say is, talking to Eddie Murray, who had a big game of the home running game, clinching Game 7, and hit 2 actually. He had been in a little bit of a slump, and he was one of those things where he felt like he was coming out of it. It hadn't shown up yet in the box score, right? But he felt like he was close. And when you're an athlete, you feel like you're getting your timing back in your jump shot, or as a hitter, sometimes you're just seeing the ball better. Hasn't translated into hit tip, but you're just seeing it better. And he was confident going into that. And I think it was Jim Dwyer came up to him, was like, "It's your day, man. It's your day." And before Game 7, or game, I guess they won in Game 5. I'm sorry, Game 5. But he's like, "Don't put any more pressure on me." But he hit one out, and he came back and said, "I don't think I'm done yet."
That's awesome.
That's how good he was feeling.
Before I ask you about your story on the highway to nowhere, which is something that is a very interesting talking point in the city still to this very day. When you were doing the Orioles piece, what was the most surprising bit of information that you've gotten in the whole process of not necessarily from every former player or anybody you talked to? What was the most surprising thing that kind of made you like really sit there and be like, "Whoa, this happened," or something that you wouldn't necessarily think would happen during the course of a baseball season? Is there anything that sticks out to you?
There's a few things during the season, but I think it was 83 when Tippy Martinez picks off 3 Toronto Blue Jays in 1 inning.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that's one of those things. Like, I think we're having maybe kind of a magical year, maybe, if things like that are happening. There was, but it was actually before the season. I did, of course, a lot of research, and I went back to YouTube, and I'm watching like the newscast from the '83 spring training down in Florida, and Earl Weaver just retired, right? And they were all adamant that they were going to win in '83. I mean, right from spring training, they had worked hard in the offseason, and McGregor was one of those guys who said, we took 2 weeks off the end of the season, and we were back going to Memorial Stadium in the winter, working underneath in the tunnel. That was it. And they had lost in the last day of the '82 season to the Milwaukee Brewers at Memorial Stadium. They'd lost to AL East, and they were a veteran club that was like, damn sure we're going to the World Series. And they took, his pitching staff took 2 weeks off, and they were back training. And that was the attitude. You could see it in the telecast in spring training. And Ken Singleton, everybody said the same thing. We were going to win. There was going to be no stopping us. And unlike the Orioles traditionally, all those great years got off to slow starts, actually. And under Earl Weaver, and they got off to a strong start, and the momentum just carried. And they were kind of, they also said to a man, they kind of wanted to prove they didn't need Earl Weaver. We could do it without him.
Interesting.
And then getting Earl Weaver off their back. He was known to ride guys hard and be grumpy and all those kind of things, right? A little curmudgeonly kind of guy. I mean, fans loved his fiery spirit, right? But that kind of high wire, what's the right word? Intensity, right? That high intensity can be difficult to deal with day in and day out, right? 162 game season, 6 months, you're together basically more than with your family. And it really had worn on a lot of the players, and they were kind of determined, like, we know how to play this game, and we kind of want to show we could win without Earl, which I thought was kind of a really honest admission from and like I said, almost everybody. I think everybody mentioned that actually to me.
Wow. Okay. That's it's crazy because I want to experience that as a fan, and I feel like this team is getting there, and I think we're a little a piece or two off, but just before I die, Ron,
Yeah.
I just want to see one World Series trophy hoisted in Baltimore that I can experience. I've gotten to see two Lombardis. I went to the parade downtown for the 2012 Super Bowl, and when I was reading your article, I was thinking to myself like, man, this would be really cool just to experience this one day. But transitioning over
Okay.
to your last piece that I wanted to talk to you about, the highway to nowhere. That is, it's I don't even want to say wasteland for a lack of a better term, but it's a very touchy subject, and like you said, with the red line being talked about and going over that way. Um, what was some of the more memorable conversations that you had with the residents of that area?
Well, um, how much it still stings, that homes were taken from people by eminent domain, community was destroyed, families were broken apart that were never really made whole again. Um, as you know, if you're living in a Baltimore kind of neighborhood, and it doesn't have to be a row house neighborhood. It could be, um, another neighborhood. But we often in Baltimore live very in close proximity to one another. We know our neighbors. We sit on the stoop. Um, you know, houses are passed down, generationally, right? And you know, families, people are, it's kind of a cliche, but it takes a village to raise a child, right? And people always were. When people talk about the golden era of Baltimore, whether it's Barb Mikulski and the East Side or Elijah McCummings talking about growing up in West Baltimore, they talk about the community, the network that was around them. People that looked after them. They could get, they got their first jobs in the neighborhood store. They delivered, those kind of things, and they had a lot of mentors and people to look up to and role models and things like that. And that was, all shattered when the neighborhood of like Rosemont was leveled. What we call today parts of like Edmondson Village, Midtown Edmondson, Harlem Park, Poppleton. Um, just and it was so long, the process. I mean, it was really first identified in the 1940s to build up, plow a highway through there because it was the shortest way, and it was, relatively low income people, black people, that could be just moved. The city leaders felt easily, um, and then it's not until the late 1960s that the homes are really finally taken from people. So they're kind of living under this threat, this cloud that was hanging over the community too for a long time. Um, the trolley system was torn up to make room for cars and everything. And then it's the late 70s when the highways finally built. And, there's very little documentation of the demolition of those homes and the construction of the highway. I mean, I worked really hard to find photographs and they're in the story, of actually the row houses being destroyed, the piles of bricks, the piles of front doors laid across, propped up so people couldn't get into the empty homes. But it was, to your question, it was really just the sting that still remains from people who grew up there and remember what the community was like, and whose families got displaced and broken apart by that experience.
That's an unfortunate thing. A lot of people only see it for what it is today, but they unless you are from the area or your family's from the area, you don't really know a whole lot about it. You just know that it's a barren area. Um, to kind of double up on the question about it,
Yeah.
how do you feel about the whole red line situation or the potential of the red line situation?
Well, I thought it was a gross mistake and really essentially a disingenuous, even a corrupt decision by Governor Hogan to cancel the red line when he came into office, when there was funding in place, $3 billion, without producing as much as a single documented study or review or report or white paper on it. He just labeled it a boondoggle, and then cancel without any study. I mean, it was just, and then he spread the money to white areas around the state, and when the NAACP filed a lawsuit, the DOJ found that there was cause. Donald Trump's elected and his DOJ just dismisses it. But so I think, moving in the red line or light rail system through that corridor would make it bring the neighborhood in proximity to a lot of jobs, hospitals, cultural events, community, make it a more desirable place to live. There's a saying in urban development that development follows transit, right? When you build, just like in DC, every time they build a light rail stop, new homes, businesses pop up, and I think we have a tremendous. Anybody, you've lived here forever. Everybody who's lived here knows it's like impossible to go east to west in Baltimore. I mean, if you're or if you're in Dundalk or you're in Fells Point, and you want to get to Catonsville, you want to get to Woodlawn, there's like, okay, I got to leave like either crack of dawn, maybe the middle of the day, and then after rush hour. It's very hard, terrible drive to get over there. A light rail would connect all those jobs at Social Security to all the jobs at like Hopkins, Bayview, with downtown, the Inner Harbor in between, and universities like University of Maryland in the way, along the way, and then potentially even, like an above ground light rail or something to get to Trade Point Atlantic, which is booming in Baltimore County. And there's a lot of young guys I meet who, in fact, even when I've met the squeegee workers and it's stories on them that they say, what am I going to do? Go to I live in West Baltimore. I'm supposed to go to Amazon, to work a job, but how do I get there? Like it's like a 2.5 hour commute, or an hour and a half commute each way to get to a job that pays, not great, around, not much above today's $15 minimum wage. So it would make that, they're more dependable, the red line. It's the city needs that kind of investment. If we look at where DC is today, where New York is today, where Boston is today, the difference where major cities are around the world today, it's that it's transportation, right? They have subway systems that function, that work.
Right.
That's why cities work, because it's efficiency. We can all move and live and get to our jobs, get to Orioles games, right? Do everything in proximity to one another, do our shopping, right? That's why cities flourish. And so they're not built to have a car to go around,
And it's funny you mention that, because I correlate the light rail to three things. I've been riding the light rail since I was a kid. I still ride it to this day if I'm going down to the stadium, because parking is absolutely asinine in terms of price. When you think about the light rail, you think about going all the way to Hunt Valley for the movies and the shops. You think about going downtown for the sporting events, or going to the arena, and then your end line is Cromwell Station, obviously, but you can take the light rail into BWI.
Yeah.
And that's it. I mean, everything else is just, there's a ton of stops in between, obviously, but
yeah,
it doesn't go, like you said, it goes north and south. It touches the northern part, the northern tip of Baltimore County before the Hereford zone, and it comes down to the start of Anne Arundel County. And it's a north and south thing, like you said. There's nothing east and west, because getting through the city, I drive all day long for work. I'm constantly between Jessup jails and Baltimore jails, and the courthouses in between in the surrounding counties and in the city. And there's really no, the red line would alleviate a lot of that traffic and the congestion, and it would have provided a lot of jobs. So I thought that it was a good idea. I'm not an urban development planning expert, but it would have provided jobs. It would have provided a way for people to get around, like you said. And it was a very well done piece, and you brought fact as well as some opinion, but you didn't make it an emotional piece. You made it a logical piece.
Well, I think, I had this conversation with somebody else today, a filmmaker. I try to follow the truth. I mean, you go where the facts lead you, and if you come to some analysis or some interpretation, I mean, I do that. If I do that, it's because I'm informed and because I've talked to experts and I've listened to everybody's side of it. But I've listened to all the sides of the issues, all the takes on it. But objectivity, this kind of both sides that we for a long time see in journalism. I think we do still see a lot in television. Is misguided from the outset. There are not just two equal sides to every issue. As a journalist, my job is not to ask one side if it's raining outside, ask the other side if it's raining outside. My job is to open the window and look outside and see if it's raining, right? That's my approach. And so we talk about the highway to nowhere, how it got built, the displacement, where people got moved to. People will share the emotional experience of being displaced from their homes, the breakup of their communities and families and things like that. And the numbers speak for themselves. The red line, the building of the red line, people can certainly have different opinions about that. But we know, and how we started this conversation was like traveling around the world a little bit. Functioning cities have functioning transportation networks, right? They have hubs. And the red line would be a major kind of hub spoke in that wheel, right? If we think of downtown kind of being in the center, Inner Harbor area, how many different, public transportation networks can we get flowing through there to move people around? The DC Metro wouldn't work if it was just the Shady Grove line through Gaithersburg to DC, which is what we kind of have with our red line, as you mentioned, right? You kind of go from the outer burbs downtown. Okay, that's one. But it's that hub that's needed, and that what makes a city's effective, and is there is science and numbers and data behind those things, and universalities, and it's there isn't any city you point to in the world like you don't point to any great functioning city, whether it's London or Paris or Rome or any city capital, and you say, oh, everybody drives their car there, that really works. No, these cities all predate, just like Baltimore, all predate the automobile, and they all have great public transit. In fact, when the well-to-do people take public transit, that's usually a sign of you have a great transit system in a high-functioning city.
That's a good point. But Ron, I want to thank you again, man, for coming on the show. Thank you so much for talking about all of your work that you've been, putting out the last year or so. It's been a fantastic conversation as always with you. Before I let you go, let everybody know where they can find you on social media and at the magazine so they can read up on some more of your work.
Okay, yeah. So, I'm on Twitter. I'm at Ron_Cassie. It's just our website's BaltimoreMagazine.net. You should follow us on Facebook and hopefully follow us on Twitter and Instagram as well. We post lots of all those places, and ideally, people will subscribe to the magazine. It's very inexpensive. And let me make a little plug, because our Best of Baltimore issue just came out, our annual Best of Baltimore. It's 248 pages. A subscription is like, I think if you buy for a year, it's like $6 or something. I mean, it's like 50 cents. You can buy a year's subscription, and just the Best of Baltimore issue alone, 248 pages. You're going to learn so much about the city, places to eat, places to shop, things to do, stories of people in the city, and trends that are happening in Baltimore. So I really hope people will subscribe. I think as we see how much the Baltimore Banner has added to the dialogue in the city, and the Beat and the Brew and the Baltimore Sun, of course, I think, and the magazine, I think to have a really vibrant, successful, engaged city, we need people who read and follow along.
There you have it. Thank you so much, Ron. I hope that I actually voted for some of the stuff in Baltimore Magazine. I got the survey in my email, so I'm actually going to check that out. Thank you for the recommendation. It's been a pleasure as always, and hope we can do this again together sometime.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Matt. I mean, it's really just a pleasure to talk to you. Yeah, appreciate the invite.
You're welcome. I appreciate you coming on.